Recently, I've been experiencing a profound sense of insecurity, and I don't really know why that's the case, and it's there all the time. So for, I'd say, at least a week, I've been experiencing quite a profound level of insecurity. And I'm giving that term, I'm giving that condition the name insecurity because something is disturbing the physical body and consciousness, emotionally, physically, psychologically, the whole organism. And from the awareness, self-awareness of the one mind, I can see this happening to me in my consciousness and body. And from the position of self, you can't do anything. You can't act out of emptiness. You can't act from the one mind. So it's like getting an illness. When you get an illness, you can only go with it or resist it. You can be frightened of it, feel vulnerable and insecure, or you can adapt and learn to live with it. Whether you're in hospital or at home. And whether you have a literal mental illness or physical illness, you can still undergo profound shocks to the system, traumatic conditions that just come of their own. They just can come into your life without warning. So it's like being at sea and then there's a sudden storm and you've got to deal with it. It's very unpredictable and you can't really give a cause to it. And I know the first time that ever happened to me was at the age of 23, when I had a breakthrough experience. There was a kind of breakdown in the way I'm describing it now, a very profound shock to the system that made me vulnerable, made me insecure, made me frightened. And I literally didn't know what to do. So I went to the doctors and said that I'm experiencing, I don't remember the terminology, but something caused me to go to the doctor. So I obviously thought something was wrong with my organism. And I wasn't religious, so I didn't know about the soul or deeper levels of the psyche and the body. I'd never had a shock like that before, and I wasn't a particularly insecure, frightened type of person. I was very stable, very independent, and had very few problems in my life. And I came out of that shock, out of that dark night of the soul, into the light, and I found peace and silence, and that was when I became self-aware in terms of the mind, the one mind. So now I'm saying that I'm in that state again, and it's happened a few times before. I'm in that state again, and I'm aware, I'm in a state of freedom and aware, and in that state of the mind, the self, you yourself can't do anything. and you have to just see or look at what's happening. That's all you can do. And I know enough from my past experience, I know enough to not cover anything over, not escape from it, not try to change it, not try to divert my attention or bring in a substitute. I'm just being vulnerable and open and sensitive. And you wonder what is it for? Why should the organism undergo a shock like this? How do you give it a form? How do you contextualize it? How do you understand it? I mean, what's it for? What's it doing? When there isn't anything in my life that should precipitate that. I can't see any reason in my life for such a emergence of this kind of trauma. But it's very interesting. I try to be interested. I try to just allow things to happen and make observations and see what I can learn from going through this process. I have no idea how long it's going to go on for. I mean, initially at the age of 23, I think it went on for quite a few months, quite a long time. But it's not disabling, it's not like I can't function. I can function all right. I mean, you know, I can just live my regular life, but it's always there. You know, if you're listening to music or taking a walk, it's always there. But it doesn't interfere necessarily. If you want to listen to music, take a walk. It's not interfering. It seems quite different from your consciousness in terms of your daily life. It seems to be something quite different from that. And that's why I think it comes from a deeper level of the psyche. It doesn't come out of consciousness itself. So I feel it's like they say in Tibetan Buddhism, the void is very connected to the spiritual dimension, and you might say it's the threshold of the spiritual dimension. So we're not really even talking about the body or the psyche, but we're talking about an unknown domain or threshold that's referred to as the void, and in the void there's the dark night of the soul. In the void there's the initiation into the light. So you go into the dark and you come out into the light, the clear light of the one mind. And that was my original initiation. But I wonder why it's coming up again now. I don't know why I'm in the void at the moment. And I experienced it a year or so later, at the age of 25, when I went to India in the Himalayas. It was very, very profound. It was like almost like a deeper shock. And when I came out of that shock, there was an incredible sense of silence and peace. And I literally didn't want to talk. and I seemed very composed. I seemed to be very independent. I didn't need to do anything. I didn't need to think about anything. I didn't refer to the future at all, which is interesting because on the first awakening, before that happened, I was a university student and I decided to stop studying philosophy and leave the university. And from that moment on, I disconnected myself, you might say, from society. I felt I was quite a creative person and I didn't want a regular life in terms of society, family, buying a house, getting married, having children. I didn't seem to want that. That wasn't the way I was looking at my life. And so I left my future open. And then when I had the initiation and became self-aware, then not long afterwards, in the spiritual books that I was reading, I realized that was an initiation into the one mind. And in that freedom, then there was literal freedom from any sense of the future or any reference to the past. Even though my memory was intact, everything was there intact in my memory, my personality, my knowledge, understanding, but I had no need to refer back to the past or project into the future. And it's the same now. It's like I can see in this state of insecurity, if you like, that I am concerned about my future in terms of the books I've published, the interviews I've made, the videos I'm making now, in terms of communicating in the world, of meeting people of a like mind that are interested in some of the things that I'm interested in. So I do want that to come to fruition, and I suppose there is an element of projection onto that in terms of uncertainty about the future. But that isn't the cause of the insecurity. That's one aspect of projection. And another aspect of projection is a sense of uncertainty about a relationship with a woman that I have, that I've never met, but I'm corresponding with her in America. And there's a need for commitment. And I want some sense of security in the future in terms of a commitment. But she's not willing to make that commitment, not in any formal terms. But anyway, regardless of that, it can't come about for another year. So I've already been waiting for a year. Now I've got to wait possibly another year in order for us to meet. So there are two projections: a projection of the future with a relationship, and the projection into the future about meeting other people who will share in my investigations. So you could say that the insecurity is being projected onto people. Now it's interesting, today I went out for a walk and I decided for the first time in many years actually to go into a cafe, whereas in my past in Oxford, I spent every day in cafes, but it's been years and years since I've been really in a cafe. In fact, I've not been anywhere. I haven't met any people. I haven't travelled. I haven't got involved in any groups or anything like that. And just have one friend that I talk to close friend. So I don't really share my spiritual life with anybody, and so I'm looking forward to that. And today I went into this cafe, which is it's an art gallery with a cafe. And in fact, in the cafe, I showed my own paintings a number of years ago, quite a long time ago. But anyway, I went into the cafe, and sitting there, and a few people are sitting there, had a cup of coffee, and suddenly I just felt extremely vulnerable. Now, what does vulnerability mean? What does that actually mean? At that deep level of insecurity, uncertainty, at that deep level of vulnerability, when I was sitting in the cafe and experiencing that, what flashed through my mind was that was a state that I used to be in quite a lot in the 70s and 80s, from the ages of, say, 25 to 40. But I hadn't really registered that. Although that was the case, I had completely forgotten that I used to feel very vulnerable. So that state of insecurity and vulnerability, which is in a sense quite a deep level of shock in a way, a kind of shock, evidently it hadn't impressed itself on my memory, so I'd completely forgotten that was how I used to be quite a lot when I used to go around Oxford on my own in the cafes. So it's very interesting. And with this state that I'm in, there's a kind of tension that builds up in the body, usually around 8 o'clock in the evening. So if I'm just sitting still in the evening, almost habitually, my energies in my body seem to get very intense, but quite subtle. So the whole body is resonating with this kind of electric energy. I suppose people could think of the Kundalini, as it were, and the Kundalini is very connected to the void experience. So that because the Kundalini actually indicates initiation. So there are lots of different kinds of initiation in the Tantric Kundalini, and they're related to various chakras. Now it's interesting that over the last 8 months, this energy, this tension, has been in my body all the time and reaches a culmination around 8 o'clock at night. And it's there through the night. I might wake up in the middle of the night and I can feel it throughout my body. So this recent insecurity has only been here for about 4 or 5 days, vulnerability, etc. But this tension has been there, as I say, for 6 or 8 months. And my whole energies, my vital energy, you might say, in the Kundalini yoga, the pranic energy, which is, they refer to that as psychic heat. So this energy that's heating up my body is a psychic heat. And that's the pranic energy that goes from the base of the spine up through the 6 chakras to the 3rd eye, and then the seventh chakra, the crown, and that's where you exit the body to go into nirvana. So you could say the void is when you leave your body, just as you do at death. When you leave your body at a kind of psychological death, because you're dying to your ego, your consciousness, in effect, you're forgetting yourself. You're leaving your ego identity behind and becoming a true self. So you could say the void is really the point at which you die. It's the blacking out, it's the losing consciousness. And when you leave your body, they call that consciousness transference. So Buddha would have left his body, gone into nirvana, and then in a disembodied state, then was reconnected to his body in a embodied state. So what I've been thinking about over a number of months during this kind of psychic heat, as it were, I thought maybe one of my chakras was blocked. And because I was involved with this woman and feeling very upset because I couldn't meet this woman, and I really needed to come out of my aloneness, as it were, and realise the kind of male-female part of my psyche, as it were, and that is also related to the integration of the anima, the soul. So the feminine is the anima soul, and in Jungian psychology you need to integrate that, and the anima is responsible for producing fantasy. So you could say that what's called Maya in Tantric yoga, what's called Maya, the veil of illusion, is a form of Kundalini. So at the base of the spine, in the darkness of like a cave, as it were, in the darkness of a cave, is the black cobra goddess, Kali, and she symbolises death. And you could say that she's the goddess of death, and in a sense, when you're awakening the Kundalini at the base chakra, then you're awakening Kali, and in a sense you could say that's the void. You awaken in the void of Kali, which is a kind of destruction in the death, in the psychological death. You've got to, in a sense, destroy the attachments of the ego identity to your past, to your conditioning. And then it rises up through the navel into the heart. And I thought maybe the heart chakra, which is red, so Kundalini, Kali becomes Kundalini proper, the red serpent. And the heart, of course, is love. And I thought there was a blockage in the heart to do with love, to do with the feminine, the integration of the feminine, the feeling level. So you've got the base chakra, which is where the sexual element is. That would be the limbic system. That would be related to aggression, related to sleep and waking, the kind of rhythms of the body, the biorhythms, is related to emotionality and is very reactive, like fight and flight. It's a very reactive level. Instincts are very impulsive, what they call in Freudian psychology the id. It's a vital energy. It's like an impulsive energy. And in consciousness, the ego identity has to moderate. So if you're feeling very impulsive, you can't just relate to people if you're very obsessive or very impulsive, because that will turn people away. So you've got to moderate the intensity of the id, the vital instinct. So if you're coming into a situation with other people and you're in a slightly aggressive state or self-assertive state, you've got to like calm down, you've got to modify that. You know, you've got to behave yourself in school, you've got to behave yourself in the family. So you have this vital force that has to be modified, and then, as I say, you come to the heart and to do with love, which is also passion and compassion. So I felt that maybe my beginning to relate to a woman after many, many years, that disturbed a very deep level in me and was very, very upsetting, and I found it very difficult to deal with, the emotionality of it, very deep disturbance in the emotions, which of course that's the level of insecurity, that's the level of uncertainty, the feeling level at the emotional level, the feeling level which is more holistic in the heart, is when things are in balance. But if it's the id and the vital forces and quite destructive forces and aggression and sexuality, then you know, it's a very powerful disturbance in the organism. So I didn't really know how to deal with it. And in relating to this woman, I did learn to communicate with her. I learned to find some kind of rapport and balance, and you might say there is a kind of tacit agreement that we will get together, and there is this kind of understanding, this kind of love, but it's not realized. I haven't actually met her. And so what it says is the anima, which is the feminine aspect of the soul, that needs to be integrated, so that instead of fantasizing about a woman, that means that you haven't met the real woman, but you've talked, you've written letters, or you've talked over the internet, over Skype or something like that, and she interviewed me for my work as well, but I haven't met the real person. So in order to integrate, you've got to integrate the anima, you've got to form an understanding, you've got to have you might say, a kind of good relationship, and in laying that foundation, then you realize the anima by actually meeting the person. So you meet the person. So this 2-year delay is almost like forcing me to deal with the anima, forcing me to deal with the emotional disturbance. And as I say, coming an initiation into this level of the void and the Kali, the destructive energies. You've got to, like, because of the serpent power, the psychic heat, you've got to burn away all the impediments, all of the projections, all of the disturbances in the emotionality and the sexual energy and the desire and passion. You've got to, like, quell your energies in order to reach a balance, so you can respect the other person, so you can meet the woman without asserting yourself, without becoming possessive. So I understand all of that, and I think that's really what I'm going through. I feel that the vulnerability is very much a feeling level. I feel it's not emotional. I don't feel emotional. I feel very much it's a feeling level, but it's I'm not sure if it's a wounded state, you know, the trauma. If it's traumatic, it may imply a kind of wounded state. Now, if I look back to my past, I have had, I would consider, very good relationships with women. I don't think I've ever had any negative relationship with a woman. Now, if I go back to my childhood, I had an older sister who was 7 years older than me, and my mother didn't really get along with my father. There was definitely a division there, so there wasn't what you might call a loving relationship. And so I experienced that kind of division, which resulted in a kind of conflict now and then, but the conflict between them, my mother and father, wasn't enough to destroy the feeling of unity within the family. So I grew up feeling quite unified and secure, but I think there was a level of insecurity which I don't think left an impression on me. I don't think I was consciously aware of remembering that, so I didn't kind of look back with any negative feelings. And the same way, as I say, I went through years of feeling vulnerable, but I'd completely forgotten that. So you might say the level of being hurt, being injured or hurt or wounded by life really hadn't made me feel negative about it. In some way, I feel being insecure and vulnerable isn't really a bad thing. I don't see it as something to escape from. I don't see it as something to repress. I see it as something to understand. So you might say one of the elements of the heart would be understanding, that you want to understand in order for the relationship to work out. And maybe I didn't understand my mother, maybe I didn't understand exactly how she was feeling, and maybe she found it difficult within the family situation to actually show affection. Maybe she was blocked in some way. But as I say, I mean, I felt secure with my family, I felt cared for, etc. But I think as I grew up and I started going out with girls and everything, I don't think that I carried with me the idea of love. I don't think that was an important thing. I wasn't very psychological, so I think because I wasn't very psychological, I don't think I retained very much the idea of labelling your experiences like insecurity. I wouldn't have labelled that, so I'd have been insecure without actually thinking that, and just like live with it. So I think I've always lived with my condition rather than escape it or resist it. I've always taken the rough with the smooth. But I find it very difficult to see in this insecurity and vulnerability the kind of void area, the threshold of the spiritual, as it were. I find it difficult to realise a balance. It's like, what is security? I mean, I could ask myself, what is security? And I don't have an opinion, I don't have a conclusion. I think in the projection onto the woman, and the projection of my work in the world with other people. I think with the woman, security would be for two people to have an understanding, so that the relationship works through understanding. And in terms of communicating my ideas, I think again, the best I would hope for would be an understanding of what is being said, an understanding of the work that might come about between myself and other people, that we're working on the nature of spirituality, for example. And of course the woman would be involved in that. She's part of that process of spirituality. So if there's a blockage of the psychic heat, the psychic energy, or the pranic energy that should circulate in your body from the crown to the base of the spine, then you would think of the solar plexus. And I know that my solar plexus does get quite heated, and I think it does become the kind of central area of this heat, psychic heat, pranic heat. And I think that's what builds up the tension in the evening when I'm sitting very quiet. Although I sit quiet during the day, it's only around 8 o'clock where I get this intense heat. Then I go to bed and I'm quite relaxed. I go to sleep. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night anyway, and I'm aware of my body having this kind of electric energy in it, very subtle. It's very, very subtle. It's like an electric charge, but it's got a negative connotation, but it's not painful. It's not, as I say, the overall disturbance doesn't disturb the natural functioning of the body or the mind or conscious, so you can enjoy music, take a walk, etc. It's almost like it's not, in a way, I say it's to do with the threshold of the spiritual. And so the spiritual is quite different from the psychic dimension and the physical dimension. So you could say that psychophysically, the kind of spiritual energies enfold the whole organism holistically. So there is a kind of holistic aspect to it, and by implication you could say there's a healing of the wound. So this kind of pranic energy is a kind of healing of the wound, of separation, of division, of duality between two people, between yourself and the world. So I want to be in the world with other people, but I'm very alienated. I want to be with a woman, but I'm very alone. And maybe in the vulnerability are aspects of loneliness. Although I've never been, again, psychological, so I've never labelled myself being lonely, but I probably have experienced that without calling it anything. So when you're in the mind, the self, you're in a state of freedom. And therefore, you're not looking at your physical state or your psychic state or your psychophysical state as wanting to be free of it. You don't want to run away from the condition, whatever that condition is, on the negative level. You know, because you're free, you don't need to feel free in your body and your consciousness. It's a matter of I would say necessity. You're going through the necessary process of living. you're going through the necessary process of relationship, you're going through the necessary process of living in the world and society and the human condition. So I'm not afraid of the human condition. I'm not someone that wants to change the world or change human nature or change consciousness. I mean, I respect the fact that each person is doing what they're doing to make things work for the whole species, the whole globe. So I don't have any spiritual opinion about the conditions of the world. I mean, we're all going through the initiation, you might say, of being born into the human condition with human nature. And so, you know, my understanding is that we each have compassion for each other because we're all in it together. We're all labouring, working to make it work. I mean that's what I trust. I have absolute trust in the world around me. I don't point fingers at scientists. I don't point fingers at politicians. I try to understand and respect the fact that people are dedicated to what they're doing. So maybe I'm going through a kind of healing process, which is an integration process. You're integrating the opposites, you're integrating the negative and positive. But again, I'm not analytical. I know the terminology, I can talk about Kundalini, etc., but I don't analyse myself in a kind of Freudian psychological way. I understand symbols, how symbols work, and mythology, but I've never really analysed myself psychologically. I find that totally inadequate. I'm using terms like insecurity, vulnerability, but I'm trying to be neutral about it. I'm not really, for the sake of conversation, for the sake of, you might say, defining my condition, defining my condition as the human condition, which I believe everybody's going through. I think everybody's going through a very primal initiation on this planet. I believe human life is about initiation. So you could say we're all going through a kind of Tantric Kundalini. We're all going through the union of opposites, because at the crown of the head, the father-mother dyad, Kundalini and Shiva, which is Shakti and Shakta, they unite. And when the mother-father unite at the crown of the head, the yogi, or one in meditation, is liberated as the Buddha, as a divine child. So the Buddha is liberated from the union of Kundalini Shiva, and you might say is born into nirvana, into freedom. And so I would say that's a very good, I think, a very good way of looking at the situation. So I would say Kali is death, which is the burning away, the ashes, the burning away of the ego complex, which means your attachment to conditioning, your attachment to your past, the attachment when you literally die to all that you've possessed on the earth. Then in the heart, you've got the transformation in the fire. You get this transformation. So you go from the black to the red, and then when you go into the head, the crown of the head, you go through rebirth, which is symbolized by gold, the sun rising. As the Buddha became enlightened, the sun was rising, so the golden sun, and therefore you see on statues of Buddha, you see a golden halo. That's the divine child, the divine golden child. That is your own self. So the self is liberated from the psychophysical conditions of consciousness and goes into nirvana. And that's your true self, your true individuality. So you go through the void on the threshold, and you go through the fantasy visionary level, as it were, when you die. Just like when you go to sleep, it's the same thing, you dream. So you're in the anima fantasy, you're in the symbols and mythology of religion and mysticism, the visionary level. And then you come out of that into nirvana. So just as individuals are going through initiation, then maybe the whole species is going through an initiation. And the war, you might say wars, are the epitome of conflict, of the opposites. What Jung calls the warring opposites. So the warring opposites, then the conflict between two people, the conflict between two countries, the conflict within human nature itself. Within the very genetic structure, the very psychic structure of the symbol, and so forth and so on. Language is fragmentary, and so you have what's right and what's wrong. And you have conversation, you have argument, you have disagreement, both in personal relationship, but if you're painting a picture, making music, you're raising a family, you're doing scientific investigation, all that process of thought and knowledge is a kind of friction, which is psychic heat. So you're generating vitality and psychic heat. So I would see in the ebb and flow, or the curve of a chart, as it were, the ups and downs. I would say that the war is the clashing of the opposites, is the fire from which the phoenix rises from the ashes. Now, I'm not justifying war, I'm not justifying violence, I'm not justifying human nature, I'm just trying to give some kind of context for what might be happening on this planet. That's all I'm doing. I'm not really interested in projecting onto the world a kind of problem, or saying that human nature should change and there shouldn't be any violence, shouldn't be any psychic heat, emotionality, argument, assertion, competition. I mean, that's the human nature, that's the human drama. I'm not going to kind of split things up or condemn everything. I'm just trying to understand what initiation is, personally and collectively and universally. So just as you can have a psychological death of the ego, as it were, in the void, You can go to sleep and enter the void and then you dream, and when you physically die you do the same thing. So right there you have three processes that are symbolic. They're symbolic of initiation, they're symbolic of death and rebirth, or death, transformation and rebirth. And the transformation is the heart, and fire represents the visionary level. So the dream level, the visionary level, the anima level, the fantasy level is the imagination. So culture, music, art, science, knowledge is the process of transformation in the heart center. When you go into the head, you have the sixth chakra, which is the third eye. And the third eye is Bodic insight, or intuitive wisdom. And it's the Kundalini as the flame of wisdom. So in a sense, you could say the freedom from the fragmentation of knowledge, the conflict, the warring opposites, is to gain insight into Maya, which is the veil of illusion, which is exactly the fantasy. The veil of illusion, it are the thought forms in the psyche that make up the visionary level, that make up the dream level, that make up the visionary imagination of a poet, of a scientist, of a musician, of a philosopher. So the whole framework of knowledge is a necessary friction, a necessary integration, a necessary understanding of human nature through self-knowledge. Because the end of the goal is to realize yourself, your true self. To be reborn out of knowledge, as it were. And knowledge is the human condition, and the whole reality of our psyche as an animal body, the animal body and the psyche conscious. The whole point of that is language. So you could say we're language-based organisms on this planet, on this particular planet. We're language-based organisms, which means we're knowledge-based, we're memory-based, we're experience-based, because we get our experience, then we formulate that as knowledge in the memory. That's our consciousness. So you could say we're in the fire. Our initiation is into the transformation, into the fire. So human nature is very fiery, very aggressive. We're animal. We have an animal instinct, very aggressive, and on the human level, very emotional. Very passionate. We've got to be passionate to paint pictures. We've got to be passionate to make life an adventure by putting a man on the moon, or going into the quantum field, or investigation into mysticism, religion, into psychological death, into the void. There's an adventure. We've got to have that passion in order to do that. And of course, the animal body being aggressive, being predatory, because we eat meat and we kill each other. I mean, Aboriginal tribes, they kill each other. And so, they're living in Australia, and you've got all these different tribes, and for territorial reasons, for survival reasons, they may feel they have to kill each other to get food, and maybe, people are competing to get food, and so forth and so on. So it's very understandable that we're born into this animal body, and we've got this massive problem of violence and aggression. It's very difficult. But I don't think that's the problem of knowledge. I don't think that's a problem of consciousness per se, or of thought. thought, knowledge, experience. No, it's the animal instincts. And so what they say in the Kundalini and what they say in alchemy is that you have to sublimate the lower instinctual energies through the heart. You've got to sublimate them, transform them in the fire. So again, if you take conflict between two people, when you have disagreement, argument between two people, two countries and two people or two tribes, then inevitably in language and emotion you have to reach a point of friction. There has to be that friction. Now whether you're going to go through the fire and be liberated and find union with the other person, union between countries, a global society that's in unity, or love, because love really is union in the heart, a balance, then it's inevitable that every relationship, it involves going through the fire, and some people can't resolve that. They get in conflict and they split up, or they become violent. So they either split up, become violent, or they reach a level of understanding. And the compassion is, you have to have compassion for all those people who suffer through violence, suffer through misunderstanding, suffer through conflict. It's built into the system. And with insight, the third eye, as you come out of the fire, and you have insight into the veil of illusion, into Maya, into the visionary level, into the thought forms and fragmentation. You have an insight, and that insight frees you so that you can be liberated. So scientists, they're working on, say, subatomic particles in nuclear physics, quantum physics, and they're waiting for an insight to go further into the level of the quantum field. You have to have insight. If you're going to create something new in art, you've got to have an insight. If you're going to create in the relationship something fruitful, you have to have an insight into your differences, an insight into the instinctive, natural, passionate friction that's inbuilt into relationship. When it gets very difficult, and you have sexual pleasure, you have pleasure doing things together, and then your character comes out, your personality comes out, your opinions come out, and there's friction, and you don't know what to do about it, etc. So, the idea of conflict and war and vision and fire and war, all of that. Again, I'm not justifying anything, I'm just saying it seems to me to be inbuilt symbolically into the very structure of the planet, into the very structure of nature. Nature's predatory, nature's competitive, nature's territorial. And the whole titanic forces of earthquakes and tectonic plates and exploding stars and black holes, I mean, it's all built into the very design of the universe, the very structure of the physical universe and the physical organism. And I think that knowledge, thought and knowledge, consciousness, is really to mediate, it's like changing our nature. Nature, animals can't change their nature. They're completely habitual. They have no choice. We have choice within our thought and our knowledge. And through transforming an understanding in knowledge, in consciousness and thought, then we can sublimate the animal into the divine. through the human condition. So the human consciousness knowledge condition, human nature, is the very heart center, the very fire and passion that can free us and liberate us through insight. And that insight lifts us up to a spiritual level of liberation. We've got to go through the fire. And I think, if you think of the earth today and the various wars going on, and the idea since the Second World War that ended in 1945, in the Cold War in the 50s and 60s, there's always been the kind of feeling through nuclear power, nuclear energy, the nuclear bombs, that there will be a third world war. And it's still possible. But my feeling is it won't happen, and my feeling is that we will progress in a deeper understanding, and that we will successfully go through this period of civilization at the moment in a technocracy, and we come out of the other side, and our future as a human species, I think, will be more liberated. But I think technology and genetic engineering and colonization of planets and all kinds of nefarious connotations of transhumanism and super intelligent computers and artificial intelligence, lots of challenges, very negative challenges, you might say. But I think that self-knowledge is one option. I'm not saying that everybody should be involved literally in self-knowledge as a process, but I think some of us are involved in self-knowledge. That's what we are awakened to as spiritual people. And I think instead of going around pointing the finger at other people and governments and technocracy, and pointing the finger at consciousness and thought and blaming and trying to find the cause of the original sin and the cause of evil and the cause of war and violence, I think that we should understand the transformation, try to make it clarify and articulate what the process is, and share that understanding and knowledge in the public space, in discourse with other people, and be more constructive and understand the wisdom tradition, understand that people have been involved in this spiritual inquiry for thousands of years.